Today we're gonna update my Squad Busters tier list that got almost 100,000 views, and there's two major things that have changed, technically actually three, since the release of my first list. The first is that the developers did a huge balance change, making things like the Trader way stronger than they were before, and giving a bunch of units more health. The next thing that changed is, well, they've now got Ultra units in the game, and the final thing that's changed is that I've gained almost 8,000 additional trophies over the course of somewhere between like 1 to 1,500 more games than I had played since my first list. So there's a bunch of reason to do some updates, and things are going to change around. So I'll have timestamps in this video for each of the units that I'm ranking and updating, but I will talk about every single unit to share why it is that I've ranked them the way that I have. And the first thing we've obviously got to talk about, and we'll start from the bottom and work our way up, is going to be the Trader. Although I originally ranked the Trader in the F tier, he has subsequently gained a buff where he gets 50% more gems than he used to, and I would put him all the way up in A. I wouldn't quite put him in S because he's not exactly a complete package, but anytime the Trader shows up, you do need to completely change your plan for the way that you play the game. There's going to be people that have Traders that will win and people that don't have Traders that will lose. That's not to say that Trader is so busted that I would put him in S tier. Like, I don't think he deserves that, but because he changes the way you completely play a draft, I do think he earns this A tier title, and you can run a 0 DPS build using a Trader, and it's really good. In fact, I made a dedicated video on exactly how you run that strategy, and I'll put a card up in the top if you want to see exactly how to do it. Although you could find justification for putting the Trader in the S tier, the reason I haven't put him there is that all the units that will be in the S tier are great if you start the game with them, if you get them in the middle of the game, or you end the game with them. A Trader does not work that way. He's just okay at the start, assuming that nobody pushes you, but he can be good there in the right game mode or combination of units that you can draft. But it's not a slam dunk like the S tier units are. In addition, at the end game, you add him in on top. It might help, it might do nothing for you. It all depends on how your situation is going. So you can justify putting him in S tier. I think compared to the other units we have in S tier, which again are top tier no matter when you get them, I think we leave him at an A. Now from there, we need to talk about the chicken. And I have learned a lot about the chicken, and I need to apologize for bullying the chicken the last time around. I gave him an F. And the thing is, we've learned a lot about the way that speed boots work, and also it got a slight buff. I'm gonna bring the chicken up to a C. So here's the thing about speed boots that you need to know. First of all, by mashing down the turbo button, you will move faster and shoot faster, which is important. But we've also learned that you can actually let your turbo recharge all the way back up to the maximum number of turbo boots that you've picked up. The significance of this is that I have actually stopped mashing the turbo button so much, and I made a video about this, how I'm now saving my turbo instead of constantly using it or like doing the sort of like spam pressing that you often see people doing. Instead, you let that turbo accumulate and you can run or pursue as needed in really major ways. I wouldn't draft the chicken early. I would still go for it mid to late game in order to add speed boots to your squad, but I am finding it to be very powerful. From here, we've got to have some difficult conversations, and the B is a really weird one that I'm tempted to just leave in D, and the problem is you always have to leave the middle to get a B, which is okay sometimes, but often is pretty bad. Her DPS is actually insane, but I think I keep her here. In fact, I'm also going to keep El Primo, Dynamite, and Colt exactly where they are.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine. But you just...
El Primo doesn't have enough DPS. You don't want to draft him early. If you have to, you will, and he does turn into a solid tank that can stun. Dynamite does a lot of area of effect damage in a meta where I don't know that that's what you want to be doing. You typically want to burst out single units. Colt does a lot of great single target damage, but he's really squishy. Both the B, the Dynamite, and the Colt, it's not a coincidence, are somewhat dependent on your getting a battle healer to increase their maximum health. We'll talk about the battle healer a little bit later, but I would actually leave her where she is as well at a B. This means we need to get a look at the things that are in the C tier. And in the C tier, we've got Bo. Bo, I'm gonna bump all the way down to F. He is the last thing I want to draft. In a worst case, I accidentally take a Bo. He does drop mines, which is really cool, but he just does damage to monsters. And in really tough lobbies, that's not going to cut it. In the early game, he's actually awesome, and against inexperienced players, he is awesome. But against players that know what they're doing, I cannot afford to be drafting a bow. And although the stun from the mines when you stand still is pretty cool, although it is nice to burst down PvE content faster, and that does protect you from someone rolling up on you and taking you down, I'd rather have something that's far more versatile, that does great damage to my opponent, and also is going to help me take down the PvE content. If you're getting value from this video so far and want daily Squad Busters videos and live streams, consider smashing the subscribe button or throwing a like on the video. Heck, even leave a comment with your thoughts, and thank you for supporting my channel. You can also use code Chisgule in-game. This brings us to the Mavis. And Mavis, since the last time I rated her, she now drops gems when she's picking carrots. She didn't used to do that. So that's kind of a big deal. Such a big deal, I would bump her up to an A right next to the Greg. I think they're about the same in terms of value. I think Mavis technically might get you more value than Greg, but there are more trees in the middle, and that's often very valuable. I'm finding that in difficult lobbies, you really need alternate ways to get value, which is a part of the reason why Greg and Mavis are so high value, and I rate them as an A. When everybody is a hotshot in your lobby, that means they all know how to hunt for value, which means there's going to be very few monsters left to fight, which means you're going to have a very small chunk of land when there's still 9 to 10 players left in the lobby with 60 seconds left. So you need as many ways to get value as you can, and even just one Mavis in your squad, one Greg in your squad goes a long way. So being able to pluck carrots with Mavis, I find at the A tier in the meta that we're in. This brings us to Penny, and I really like Penny, although she is somewhat squishy. The thing that's valuable about Penny is that she can drop a map, and if you actually can go get your map, that's going to be awesome. I move her up to the B tier. The thing about Penny is that sometimes you can never get your map. In game modes where you really, really are strapped for gems, she is amazing. In fact, I would even say Penny is better than a B when she's good, and she probably is a B or a C when she's bad. She's bad in maps like Angry Vines, where the map closes in on you and you actually cannot go get your treasure in many cases. But she's insane in game modes like Doppelgangers, where you're gonna switch to a Penny, get a bunch of maps, switch to something else, then go get your treasure. That's sweet. I wouldn't put her higher than a B, even though her single target DPS is insane, because it's really all she's offering. Her utility is in the form of having given you supplies, which when you go get them, that's awesome. When you don't, it's a bit of a problem. This leaves 2 units that I think I'm going to leave ranked the same. The Royale King is kind of cool. He summons little minions that can go fight for you, but the problem is that they don't follow you anywhere. And so if the action moves away from where you were, he's just kind of like a bad barbarian, I've found. So although the Royale King is epic and he's cool to start a game, I think I leave him in C. And often when I do draft him in the late game, I'm kind of like, why? Like, why have I done this? I should have just picked almost anything else. Now, the Wizard, on the other hand, gives you a second spell slot and can help you get more spells. That's really powerful. But the problem with the Wizard is that he's really squishy. He's the kind of unit that really benefits from having a battle healer toward the end of your draft to increase your hit points, which, by the way, I made a dedicated video about this idea of the units that are best suited for a battle healer combo that really elevate them, because Wizard does area of effect damage and it's good damage, but, and he just really needs the health. He often gets picked off, and if you don't have some way to keep healing your units, even fighting the PvE stuff, I find that my Wizards get really, really dangerously low on health. The way that you can switch spells between the 2 that he's got is you just tap the other spell and it'll put it in the main slot. And there you go. So I think I'd still give the Wizard a C, but I would debate bumping him up to a B. For now, I'm gonna leave him here. But there are some units in the B tier that need to get knocked down a peg. And the first one I'm gonna knock down a peg is actually the Nita, and I'm gonna put it behind the Wizard. The Nita is really cool in that she summons a tank, and that tank will go fight for you. It's a bear, and it's going to soak up damage as long as nobody attacks you from behind. The secret to taking down a Nita is just to attack from behind. So Nita will sit there and do range damage, which is awesome, but I am finding that it's probably not as good as I had originally rated it, certainly not compared to what's there. And I also really want to bump down, unfortunately, the Goblin. The Goblin goes all the way down to F, and that is a huge downgrade. Why am I penalizing the Goblin so much? What I am finding in the toughest lobbies is that you need a way to be punchy and get to the middle fast. If you can't control the middle fast, you're going to lose to the people that do. And at that point, a Goblin looks really bad. So a Goblin can be really cool in a map with a trader where you get your trader, you get your Goblins, you're running around getting a bunch of extra gems because you have the two of them and Goblin is raining down a bunch of coins. But if you draft Goblin any later than like your first fusion, I'm just finding that he's not adding nearly as much value. You would rather have had many of these other units, and typically I start a game with some of these other units that are in the B tier. I always look for either a Shelly or a Barb as a great starting unit. And before we go talk about those units, I do just want to mention that obviously Goblin is insane on doppelgangers. You pick a Goblin, it rains down a gazillion coins, you switch to something else, then you switch back to Goblin, and it rains down coins all over again. And that switch is very important because if you just add a Goblin to your squad, you get a small amount of coins, but when everything switches to a Goblin, it's a huge amount of coins. I used to recommend Goblin on Double Trouble, but again, I'm finding that in really tough lobbies, you get to the middle, there's not gonna be tons of chests for you to open to squad up, and your focus needs to not be on squatting up at the start, it needs to be claiming the value from the middle. So again, Goblin F, and I'd prefer to draft a Shelly or a Barb, which I keep at a B tier. Shelly does great damage and has a knockback. Also, the Barbarian does great damage, and you want to draft a lot of it at the start anyways, because when you get two of them, then they go to Elite, and they are really fantastic. Now, it's not a coincidence that in the B tier, we've got all these healers, and maybe I should be bumping them up higher, but I find that the Medic, Ham, and also the Battle Healer fill a very important role. You're going to need at least one of these in your squad, and I tend to lean more towards the Medic. Why do I lean more towards the Medic? Because he actually will actively be healing you while you are in a tough fight, and that is super valuable. The Pam can heal you between fights, or if you bait somebody onto the heal station that she drops onto the ground. So that is nice when it works and worthless when it doesn't. It's actually kind of overpowered when it works, especially if your enemy doesn't realize that it's happening. The Battle Healer, she does heal when you open chests. Frequently, that's not a thing you're doing when you're in combat versus an enemy, deciding whether or not you win or lose the match. But she's sort of like, you can think about it almost like a pre-heal. She's like pre-healed your squad by increasing their max hit points. It's like another way to think about health in the game, is to think about it as a health pool for each unit. And you increase the effective size of the health pool by healing that unit or by just increasing the total health pool. So all of the healers do that in different ways. I like them all at the B tier. I don't think I would rate them higher, but we do need to knock down and switch around some of the folks that are in the A tier. The one I'm gonna bump down from the A tier is actually the Mortis. Now, Mortis is really cool. He lets you summon things that you have, really PvE things that you have destroyed, as things that fight for you. So you can get your battle robots to fight for you and all kinds of other stuff you take down on the map, except the things that are labeled as bosses. And toward the end, it can be actually kind of difficult to find things to take down with your Mortis to add to your squad. Each Mortis lets you put 4 things in your squad, and he does some pretty cool stuff when those things die. If you can start a match with a Mortis, he can make your squad look really intimidating. He is a bad add to your squad toward the end of a match, because he isn't really elevating your squad as a whole, and pretty much all the units in the S tier are going to do that, which we will get to in just a second. First, however, we do need to change around the rank of the Heavy. Now, the Heavy I originally ranked as an A, because he shoots really, really big damage if you stand still. But if you are moving around a lot or ambushing people, I find that his damage ramps up too slowly. In fact, when he is, supposed to be sort of tanking, he's a heavy unit, he's in the back line. He's not your front line. So he has a lot of hit points and doesn't start doing damage till too late. Yes, if you're standing still with him, he will do cool things. And there are situations like Angry Vines where you're just trapped in the corner and maybe you will just stand still. But I find that compared to the other things we can draft in the B tier and the A tier, I actually want to jump him down to a C. Would I start a match with a Heavy? Absolutely. But would I prefer a Shelly or a Barb? Yes. Every time I would prefer Shelly, or a Barb. So I realized the heavy needs to get bumped down, and I realized when I couldn't ambush other squads and I was losing those exchanges, it's because I've got this heavy that's going to ramp up, and by the time he ramps up, I've already lost the fight or lost a lot of units. Okay, now from here, there are things that stay the same. The Hog Rider is still freaking awesome. Being able to go through grass and get a speed boost is sick. So touching grass, still amazing. Hog Rider, looking great. And I would swap one thing around, and that is that I would take the Max and I will put him up to S tier. And the reason I'm bumping Max up to the S tier is that he makes your whole squad move faster. So if you have a Max and your enemy does not have a Max, you can chase them down. As long as you both have the same amount of turbo, you will catch them and you will get them. If you have a Max and your enemy that's chasing you does not, you can get away as long as you both have the same amount of turbo. Max transforms your squad, and that in and of itself is super, super valuable. That's why it belongs in the S tier. And the last time I made this list, I said you could kind of change around where the witch is and where the Max is, and that's exactly what we're doing this time around. I think I bumped the witch down to an A. The witch is really good when her skeletons are doing work for you, and she is very vulnerable when they are not. Now, the skeletons can sort of work like a taunt, forcing your enemy to attack them instead of your more valuable units if they get in the way of, you know, where your enemy is attacking you from. But there are times where you just don't have the skeletons, and she doesn't really transform the squad like pretty much all the units in S tier do, except the tank. The tank doesn't transform your squad, she's just a beast. The tank is weak until you get into the physical tank. When you are in your tank, she has a ton of health and she does a huge single blast. It honestly reminds me of like a Mortal Strike Warrior from World of Warcraft, where you're like getting this one big hit and your goal is to just do massive damage with that hit. There's a huge cooldown between attacks, and it's not a coincidence that she's right next to the Archer Queen, who will boost the attack speed on the tank, which is insane. So tank doesn't exactly transform your squad, but when you have the tank, it's so powerful, it stays in the S tier. I called that the first time around, it stays where it is. The Queen, I kind of called it the first time around, it stays where it is, especially if you compare with units like Tank plus Shelly plus Penny, like Wizard. These units all together are kind of insane. At the new Ultra tier, you get an Expo spell, and that's pretty damn good. And by the way, the Barb King also transforms your squad. Your close combat units all go and attack faster. That's amazing. And at the Ultra tier, he is going to give you a better rage spell, which is super cool. Now, for the most part in making this list, I've actually not talked about the Ultra form of these units, because at the end of the day, the overwhelming majority of people don't have Ultra units and are nowhere near having Ultra units, and talking about what the Ultra effects would do honestly is not going to be helpful for most people. And most people are not going to somehow tunnel vision one particular unit to take to Ultra tier, because there's just not a good way to do that. Not typically in the shop can you go in and go and accomplish that in a great way. Now, I have taken multiple units to the Ultra tier, including the Barbarian. I've taken Shelly, Greg, and also the Chicken, all the way up to 4 stars. And I would say that having them is nice, but I'm gonna be real with you. Any one unit to the Ultra tier doesn't necessarily dramatically change the calculus for how your team performs. I think once all your units are at the Ultra tier, you probably notice the effect. And what I like about this game is that the effects are very incremental. For example, Greg is giving 1 heart when you chop down a tree. I thought maybe this will serve as a healer replacement. Bro, you barely notice the healing effect of a heart, let me tell you. So like, I'm not saying the Ultra effects are bad. I'm quite confident that some are more powerful than others, but for the most part, I'm just finding a very, very incremental boost from the Ultra tier. And if that holds true, then this list probably won't change. But I am pushing every single day toward a new Ultra unit. And if you want to see me do that in live streams, consider subscribing to the channel. I've been making daily videos and streams about Squad Busters. And if you got value from this video, consider using code Chisgule, especially if you're going to buy your way up to Ultra tier units. If you want to see times that I've bought out the shop, check the cards in the end screen that'll be up in just a second.